Three, two, one, action!
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's episode in the Horace Cafe in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the differences between theory and hypothesis. We have a PhD graduate with us today, guys. Hit subscribe and get your pen and paper ready and take down some notes. If there's one thing that gets my goat, it's when you sit at a table and somebody at the table says, my theory is blah, 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 blah. And I sit there and I think to myself, actually, is that a theory or is that a hypothesis?
Yeah, so I think there's, like a lot of things, there's a difference in the common usage of the word and then the sort of more technical meaning of the word. So the word theory, like you say, the way that it is most commonly used is more like an idea or a hunch. You know, if you're a detective and there's a crime being committed and your gut tells you that this guy did it, you could say, you know, I have a theory that this guy is the criminal. But the scientific, you're right, in more scientific terms, that's a hypothesis. So what you'll hear people saying as well is, you know, evolution is just a theory. And when they say that, they're accusing it of being a kind of a gut feeling or a hunch. Whereas, you know, in science, the word theory means something very different to the way that it's commonly used. And, you know, you're correct that the way people commonly use theory is more like a hypothesis. So I think if people kind of want to understand or be critical about some of the things they hear in science, it can be quite important to know that difference. You know, when a scientist says theory, they don't mean a gut feeling or an idea or a hunch. They mean something different.
This is fantastic. That's like music to my ears. So fair enough. If somebody at the table or whatever, and you're eating together and they say, my theory is blah, 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 it doesn't mean that it's true. But then, funny enough, when you have like a scientific theory, I mean, is that 100% true? Is that what you're saying?
It's a scientific theory it's difficult to say 100% true. And I think that's something that a lot of people in science will shy away from saying. Basically, a scientific theory is something, it's, you know, a description of how something works that is supported by an enormous amount of evidence. Also, what's really important is that you know, there's no significant body of evidence that disproves the theory. So, you know, for example, evolution or gravity, you know, we call these theories. And that's because, you know, the theory may get refined over time. It may be added to, bits of it may be taken out, but, you know, there's a huge amount of scientific evidence that this theory is correct. And as yet, there is no evidence to suggest that it's not correct. I mean, that's essentially what theory is. You know, relativity, gravity, electromagnetism. They are supported by, you know, decades and decades, sometimes hundreds of years worth of work, and there is no evidence out there that disproves these theories. You know, they're very, very established. You can rely on them. You can build your work on these theories and trust that they are essentially correct. That's really what scientists mean when they use the word theory.
I do like to use the example of the ancient Greeks, their theory on how atoms were bonded to each other. If I'm not mistaken, they did say at the start, atoms are connected by physical hooks. And then, of course, science comes along and we see that there is, in fact, electromagnetic bonding. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's correct. And I think it's a good example because atomic theory is a kind of well-known scientific theory that describes how atoms behave, how matter is made up of multiple atoms. And you could look at the ancient Greeks, for their time, they had some very, very good ideas. It sounds a little bit silly, this idea that atoms have little hooks that hook together like Velcro, but actually it was quite good. And I suppose you could say that that's a hypothesis, right? It's not something that they knew to be true, but it's something that, based on some evidence and understanding, it's an idea that they had. Now that we know now, like you say, that the hypothesis that atoms are hooked together is not true. But it's not a million. You can look at that as the beginning of atomic theory. That they were getting quite close. There was a lot of things they didn't understand, and a lot of they couldn't conduct experiments the way that we can now. But you can look at theory as something that is built up over, in this case, thousands of years. It's that bit of understanding that's just built on and built on and built on. And some hypotheses, people come up with these hypotheses. Some of them turn out to be true, and then they build to the theory. Some of them turn out not to be true, and then you adjust the theory to suit, depending on the results of your hypothesis. Is this true? Okay, then it gets added. Is this untrue? Then we discard it and we look at something else. So yeah, the ancient Greeks were, considering they had no lab equipment, they came very close in a lot of ways to describing modern atomic theory, which is incredible, really.
So officially, if I see somebody at the table and they say, "Oh, I have a theory," or "My theory is blah blah blah," can I just say, "Look, that's actually a hypothesis"? What do you think?
I think I'm going to sit on the fence with this one. I think the word theory, if you're not a scientist, and in everyday life, the word theory is that's the way it's been used. I think it is important to distinguish. English, the English language is often accused of being complicated because the same words mean different things. And I think this is one of these examples. I think it's okay to say, my theory is this. I think that's okay. I think what's less, you would be correct to say that is a hypothesis. I think for me, the more problematic thing is when people say things like, evolution is just a theory. I think that's very wrong. Whereas if someone says, it's my theory that Manchester United are going to win the Champions League this year, it's a fair enough thing to say. You'd be wrong, but I would let that one pass. But that's a personal opinion.
Fantastic, sir. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise. Folks, thanks for joining us today. Hit subscribe, and regardless of where you are in the world, you go home today, make sure your God or your gods are with you. Thank you so much.
And cut.